Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? So, last week we started a new series looking at Star Wars The Old Republic, which has been received pretty well on the whole, so thank you very much to you guys for that. And on stream, we took a look at the beginnings of the journey of a character called Xion, a neophyte Sith Inquisitor, and joined him as he began his journey rising through the ranks of the Sith. So, we had a good time on the stream, had a lot of fun. It was very, very cool to see where Xion's journey started. There's a character that I have previously played some years ago, and obviously it stuck with me quite a lot because it went on to inform the name of the channel, so I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at his story once again. So, as SWTOR is a RPG, as you can probably imagine, the game involves quite a few choices and decisions to be made by the character, and rather than taking a heavy approach to role-playing, I thought we'd go more on the light side, but it's helpful to have a background and story to sort of inform the character's personality and underpin his decision-making process. So today we're going to take a little look at that. So, like many RPGs, Star Wars The Old Republic uses an alignment system, in this case focused on the dichotomy between the light side and the dark side. So as you progress through the game and make choices, particularly in conversations, but occasionally in-game as well, you find your character moving either towards the light side or the dark side. Now, either of those are completely viable for any character class. You can be a light-sided Sith or a dark-sided Jedi if you like. Certain classes tend to lean more in one direction or the other, surprisingly so in some cases. But in the case of Xion here, we want to go down the dark side route and follow that with his Sith Inquisitor background. However, with many of those choices, particularly on the dark side, there is something of a tendency to have the character lean towards being a bit of a psychopath, which is not really the way I want to play the character. Sith Inquisitor tends to be a bit more subtle, a bit less in your face, so I wanted to embrace that aspect of the character a little bit more and be less crazy, in a word. So for Xion, that means whilst he seeks to increase and embrace his own power and is perfectly willing to engage in some of the more stereotypical dark side activities, the torture murder aspect of things is not something he rushes straight towards, or they're not his go-to moves per se. He's more inclined towards being manipulative and using his personality and influence and position to get people to help him further his goals rather than going straight for torture and killing. However, his patience is not unlimited, and if something is standing in the way of his goals, he's willing to use whatever means he feels are necessary to achieve those goals. So, at this point, it's worth taking a look into the origins of his personality and how he gets to the point that he makes those decisions and the background that informs those decisions. So, with the Sith Inquisitor, the player character starts off as a newly freed slave who has been sent to Korriban and arrives on the planet to face their trials and hopefully find apprenticeship under a Sith Lord and begin their journey through the ranks of the Sith. So I wanted a background for Xion that works with that story and also with where I know the story ultimately will be going as well. So this particular background quite heavily informs the setting and the decision-making process for the character and a number of their experiences as well. So it's worth taking a look at how slavery in the Empire actually works. So specifically, rather than it being an individual basis and slaves being bought and sold by specific individuals, it's an institutionalized tier of society. Slaves are the lowest rung of society and have very much formed the foundation of imperial society, with most of their structure being built upon the backs of the slavery. Most slaves have a background either as criminals or occasionally prisoners of war who are no longer useful to the military and have therefore been sent off as slaves. Or you frequently find non-humans or non-Sith from captured worlds find themselves pressed into slavery at the lowest ranks of society, because one of the least appetizing parts about the Empire's culture is its somewhat extreme xenophobia at times to anybody who isn't either Sith or human. And you will also find in and amongst the ranks of slaves former servants of Sith Lords who have, for whatever reason, fallen out of favour or been defeated by rivals or ultimately executed by the Dark Council as well for whatever action may go against the Empire. And any survivors of those actions may well find themselves pressed into slavery for their association with Sith Lords as well. Children of slaves are also born into the same caste as well, so it perpetuates that particular system. you might find several generations of individuals who have all been slaves to possibly the same masters, the same family potentially, or possibly sold around as well. With this slavery system as it is, there is very little opportunity for slaves to work their way out of that position or earn their freedom, with the occasional exception of a slave who might have exceptional talents that are more useful elsewhere. They might find themselves freed, although it doesn't happen very often. Of course, the other exception is that Sith Lords can basically do whatever they like in the Empire, giving them the choice to liberate slaves if they would like. However, again, for the most part they choose not to and wouldn't be inclined to do so, so very, very rare occurrence. So this begs the question, how did former slave Xion find himself freed and sent to Korriban? So looking at the wider setting in Star Wars, at the start of the game, we are about 10 years on from the Treaty of Coruscant. So prior to that, the Empire and the Republic have been at war for about 28 years. This war has severely depleted resources and forces on both sides, and though ultimately a victory for the Sith, the Republic was starting to rally back against them, and the Emperor decided to call for a ceasefire and give the Empire a chance to rebuild and consolidate their position following 28 years of war. The fact that this would normally mean that as the side calling for peace, the Empire would be considered the losers, that was not going to sit well with the Empire. So they attacked Coruscant and basically held it hostage during the negotiations, forcing the Republic into a less than favourable position and basically inflicting some fairly punishing terms upon the Republic, and overall the treaty favouring the Empire. However, in the years that followed, during the attempts to rebuild the Sith, the inevitable high dropout rate, shall we say, of training to become Sith led to a much slower growth in the restoration of Sith numbers than the Dark Council was happy with. So they passed a law stating that anybody with Force sensitivity from any walk of life, any background, including slaves and any captured aliens, anything of the like, absolutely had to be sent to Korriban for Sith training, which basically frees up the opportunity for Xion to begin his journey through the ranks of the Sith. So at this point, we're going to take a closer look at Xion's personal background. During character creation, I chose the Sith pureblood race for Xion, primarily because the human male faces are unfortunately some of the weakest in the game, and I wanted a character that looked more the part, to be honest. And normally, the Sith purebloods find themselves at the top of society. They have an extremely high rate of Force sensitivity, and the overwhelming majority of them end up being Sith Lords, or dying in the attempt to become Sith Lords. But in Xion's case, he finds himself and his family at the lowest rung of society as a slave. So, Xion was born into slavery. He doesn't really know how his pure-blooded ancestors fell so far from lofty heights into the bottom of Imperial society, but his family have passed on this tradition and family belief and story that they had once been powerful, possibly Dark Lords of the Sith, but somehow fallen on hard times and found themselves as slaves. So, along with his parents at a young age, Xion came into the ownership of a human Dark Lord of the Sith named Lord Alvacar, who, despite his privileged position as a Sith Lord, found himself a little bit secondary to those with Sith blood, and therefore developed quite a taste for having pure-blood slaves, basically to rub it in the face of other Sith Lords. So he purchases Xion and his family and presses them into his service. Upon reaching his teenage years, Xion's heritage and the stories his family had told him of his family's former glory fostered a growing resentment at his position. Xion knew that his master could free him if he wanted to, but he didn't have any particular reason, and Xion resolved to try and better his position and hopefully gain the attention of his master and earn his freedom. Using his resentment, coupled with his intelligence and somewhat manipulative personality, Xion began to dominate and rise to an influential position over the other slaves through mostly force of character. This eventually came to the attention of his owner, Lord Alvacar, who, somewhat concerned by this, decided to take advantage of the situation and pushed Xion into a more influential position within the household. Xion found himself carrying messages for his owner, greeting guests, and having his particular set of skills used to influence and manipulate guests of his Sith owner, to further the machinations of the Sith Lord. Despite his position within the household, other non-slaves still mocked Xion for his heritage and his position as a slave, and this caused Xion increasing resentment, and he took a great deal of pleasure when he was involved in various schemes by his master, and when those schemes came to fruition, generally to the detriment of the people who'd been mocking him, Xion took significant pride in his involvement in this. Following a number of successes in this vein, Xion's position in the household became stronger and ultimately gained him significantly better treatment from the 3 individuals in the household, including Lord Alvacor himself. One day, a human admiral is visiting Lord Alvacor and took a great deal of pleasure in mocking and deriding the Sith slave. Xion's anger rose rapidly at this and manifested as a swell of dark side energy, causing his master to turn. Realizing the source of this particular disturbance in the Force, Xion was dismissed from the meeting immediately. However, his master resolved to keep a very, very close eye on him in future. At this point, despite the peace between the Republic and the Empire, the Dark Council had decided that the ranks of the Sith were not growing fast enough, due in no small part to the mortality rate on Korriban, and they decreed that anybody with Force sensitivity, no matter their background, must be sent to Korriban for training. This provided a potential means for Xion to find his way out of slavery, particularly in light of the fact that he had come to the attention of his Sith owner. With this particular piece of news, Lord Alvacor decided to include Xion more and more in his Sith business and begin training him for a position at the Korriban Academy. His eventual plan was for Xion to join the ranks of his own apprentices. Learning rapidly in his new position of influence, Xion began to grow more confident, more independent, and more sure of himself. After about a year, Alvacor became far more confident in his slave's loyalty and his abilities as well, and began to train him more directly in the use of the Force, ready for his eventual entry into the Korriban Academy. During the course of this training, Xion's confidence improved, his position became more and more secure, and his outlook became considerably more positive. He gained a much more positive view of the Sith and the Empire as a whole, as his position and fortunes were beginning to improve. He was acting less and less like a slave and more like a Sith apprentice. Eventually, the day came in Xion's early 20s, and he boarded a ship bound for Korriban. However, during the trip, word came through that Xion's now former owner had been assassinated. One of his apprentices, jealous of the attention Xion had been receiving and pushed into action by his departure for Korriban, had betrayed his master to one of his rivals. So Xion arrives on Korriban with his position considerably less strong than it was upon his departure, and is placed into a group of former slaves, all competing for apprenticeship under Lord Zash. Lord Zash had decided to take a former slave as an apprentice, and Xion was informed that his trials would begin right away. So we have Xion alone on Korriban with nothing but the clothes on his back. His plans have basically fallen apart with the assassination of his former owner. However, he finds himself with a new pathway to power placed in front of him, and he resolves to embrace the opportunity to become Lord Zash's apprentice and push on, hopefully bettering his position and rising to power among the ranks of the Sith. So we have our somewhat pragmatic and considerably more angry than expected young neophyte Sith arriving on Korriban, determined to gain greater power for himself. He's got a background that leads him towards sort of manipulation and coercion of others as his primary route to achieving his goals, although he's perfectly willing to do other things as well if he feels he needs to. He's reasonably pragmatic in that regard. And that should pretty much cover the basis under which we're going to approach this particular playthrough. So, should be jumping back onto stream with Xion again at some point this week. Do keep your eyes out for that one. Make sure you've hit the notification bell if you want to keep up to date with when I go live. Also got plenty of Fallout stuff coming up this week as well. But for now, I do hope you guys enjoyed that one. If you did, please do hit those buttons for me. It's always very, very much appreciated. Social media links down in the description as well if you want to keep up to date with everything I'm doing on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.